Hello, welcome back to From Soft Serve. Today we're starting in Blender, of all programs, not my normal start, but I wanted to show some enhancements I'm making to the remastered mod for Dark Souls 1 through not like dynamic shadows or any of the other things, and not even like mesh hole fixing. I've still been doing a ton of that, mostly in Undead Parish, and like texture swapping, and a lot of different little things. But here I wanted to show on the right we have this map piece from Undead Parish. We can actually turn on texturing so you get a better look at what they are. They're on the pathway to Andre, our homie. And so on the right here we have the default one from Dark Souls Remastered, which matches what it looks like in Prepare to Die edition in terms of geometric complexity and like how many polygons there are. Because as we know, Dark Souls 1 was pretty low poly, as they say. It was very simplistic because obviously it was on the PS3 360. So there wasn't a lot of wiggle room for how many polygons you were rendering. Not to mention the actual RAM quantity on the PS3 360 was 512 megabytes. And on the PS3 it was 256 and 256 separated. So 360 had an easier time as it was unified. So it's easier on developers for sure. But you'll see here, the first thing I've sort of done as a pilot program is you'll see these pillars. You know, at a glance, they look fine. And I still think overall they do, but the closer you get, you can actually see they're very like hexagonal. And they are for circular pillars. And that's the other thing you have to sort of suss out is, did they mean for them? Was it a happy coincidence? Someone on Twitter was, Siafra on Twitter was mentioning that of like, well, maybe they meant for them to be hexagonal pillars, as there is some historical precedent for that in some cases. But here I was looking at other pillars, and yeah, this was basically just a technical limitation. And it looked good enough that at a glance it worked, and when, you know, people just run by them. But yeah, you can see they're pretty hexagonal. And so as like a pilot program, you know, here's the one from Remastered. And if we go over to this and go into edit mode, just so you get the same look at like the actual amount of geometry, you can see these ones have way more polygons. And I manually went through and replaced every single pillar here. Even the destroyed ones, I tried to rotate them effectively to make sure that they all had like different orientation. And what I did, at first I actually was going through each one manually and like subdividing it. So if we actually like bring that up again, this is what I started with, is where you basically grab the actual mesh itself and you can actually subdivide it. So you can actually add more polygons, but by default, that's not going to do anything. That's just going to add more triangles, right? This is where you want to shade smooth, and then you can actually, if you go back over to your vertices, you can actually, there's a couple different ways of smoothing it. Laplation, or you smooth the vertices. Smoothing the vertices is the go-to option, but of course it also sort of chunks it down a little bit. Now you'll see that it did actually gain some complexity there. So it's less hexagonal and much closer to a circle, right? And that's what we want. And then you can re-UV map it because the textures get a little warped. Not to mention they were already kind of not UV mapped correctly. And then you can basically just do a little scale thing to kind of bring it back up to size for what you need for it to fit there. And then, you know, that was a pretty quick way that you can go, okay, now it's a little bit more complex, because that's the original one, and now you can see that one's a little bit more rounded. So it's basically just bypassing the PS3 360 limitations. But what I did instead, because this was actually a lot quicker, and frankly ended up with a better result, is I actually just brought in a cylinder shape from, you know, with Blender. And then you can just texture it really quickly with the same texture. And then for the destroyed ones, I just didn't use the top here. And then you kind of just mess around with the vertices a little bit and make sure it has the same like destroyed interior texture. And then I rotated each pillar, you know, duplicate, 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 make sure to rotate the actual pillar portion so it doesn't look like it's copy pasted as much. And so you get a pretty good match between where it was and where it is. And that's where you can see, I think the texturing is actually better on the new pillars because I was able to UV map it properly. I don't think it's perfect yet, but I can show you in game. And, you know, I also went over here. I haven't replaced these pillars yet. These ones are, I have not, or no, I did actually. What am I talking about? I did. Yeah, I went all the way up here. I think those are like overlapping. Yeah. Yeah. That's why the hexagonal ones actually, I think, still work out pretty well. Oh yeah, while I was here, I ended up actually fixing the stairway as well, because these ended up overhanging a little bit too much, and there was a mesh hole, and it was a whole thing. There's been so many little issues that I've fixed. I'm in the hundreds now of mesh holes, texture issues, easily going to go into the thousands of fixes that are included with Dark Souls Remastered. But we can actually load into the game now. All right, here we go. We're in Undead Parish now. Love to see it. And let's run back up. Yeah, I did some texture fixing. Can't talk this morning yet. In here, there was a lot of UV mapping issues, mesh holes. This is included in the most recent update of 1.10. There's so many issues that are present in this game. It's kind of unbelievable. Actually, there was a piece of floating geometry right here that was in the base game. So, but yeah, here you go. So here are the pillars, and you can see if you fly up with the camera a little bit, you can see you actually have round pillars. It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. Actually, the base portions, I might need to mess with their texture a little bit, because these were like randomly differently green, using a different portion of the texture. I also added the parallax occlusion mapping to the actual like brick texture that gets used as the wall here. And last night I was actually going through. Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? I went through and I fixed the stairs here. Over here, there was actually a really interesting thing. I haven't gotten to these pillars yet. There was so much UV mapping issues on this big map piece here. You can still see some I haven't fixed yet. If you notice on that overhang right here, that is the UV mapping issues that are so prevalent in Dark Souls 1 and have been since the 2011 release, frankly. Just haven't been fixed. And I think that's because they're not super easy to notice. You have to be kind of like a sicko like me to notice them. But I did see in these little like pseudo like window doorways here, there was this, they were using the white brick texture for these interior portions, or the inside portions of the overall like wall, whatever you would call them, you know what I mean. And then I went over here, and interestingly enough, by default, these were actually using a different texture. Here I corrected them, and I actually made them match the texture that you see over here. So that's a lot of what I'm doing is looking to see, okay, well, which one doesn't make sense? Which area did they use the same textures in the same exact spot? And so I'm just trying to kind of learn from where they meant to put something. Oh yeah, look, the building's slightly floating. Damn, okay, I gotta fix that too. Such a shame. Also, this building had weird dirt marks that were, they had this transparent texture that they were using to make it look grimy. But what it ended up doing is just, it was the grime, it was actually floating. It wasn't really even like on the building at all. I've also been hand placing bricks that you can put onto the actual buildings themselves to get like, so beyond just parallax occlusion mapping, you can actually place actual bricks to give it a little bit more depth here and there. And I'm basically just continuing what they were already doing. They had already had some bricks on the corners here that they were using as like, oh, look at this brick. Yeah, I got to move that one up a little bit to match the texture. These pillars here, I obviously want to fix. You can see they're incredibly hexagonal, and I think just don't look great. And a lot of it's just, yeah, the limitation of the time that this game was made in. And so if I can smartly sort of move past that, I definitely want to do that. The other interesting thing, so this texture, or this little mesh portion, is definitely square. But the weird thing is, I have a feeling this was meant to be a pillar, not just a square pillar, or like rectangular prism, I suppose. I get the feeling it was meant to be, but I'll keep those as is. I'm trying to be very careful to not change things too much. The other thing I fixed while I was in here, which was a load of shit. See, look at that UV mapping right there. Yeah, I gotta fix that. Yep, that's another little issue. So I love making these videos. I just noticed a bunch of shit. I go, damn it. So there's another interesting thing they were doing in Undead Parish, which I'm assuming was a holdover from the really earlier like PS3 360 games. So they had this transparent texture that they were using in the crevices here, specifically in this spot in Undead Parish, or Undead Parish, I guess. And it was meant to look grimy and like, it was like a pseudo method of ambient occlusion, right? But just like doing it through an actual texture that's placed manually. The problem is it made things way too dark and it looked strange, because Dark Souls Remastered has a pretty good or pretty okay implementation of screen space ambient occlusion, which is what you're seeing here. So as you can see, when I move my character, you can see that the ambient occlusion is actually stopping because it's using screen space. So my character is blocking that. And so yeah, whenever I removed them, you'll notice the ambient occlusion does a good enough job on its own to sort of give the darkness to crevices like that. And so it wasn't necessary to have that really awful texture. We can actually, one more place I want to go, but then we can go to my Twitter feed and I can show better, essentially, examples of that. We're going to go to Anor Londo because I did something I've always wanted to do. I just didn't know if I had the strength to do it. I can't remember what movie that's from, but I think it's like a Star Wars movie or something. So what I did is, let's go down here, because technically it works up there. But I finally, because DSR added the functionality for parallax occlusion mapping that the original DS1, of course, did not have, and it was used slightly, mostly in Undead Parish, and then it wasn't really used past that. I think they ran out of time to use it more than that. So of course I figured out how to activate it on more surfaces and create height maps manually. Well, I use programs, right? I use like Later, and then there's Normalize. There's other programs to create height maps, which would then tell the engine what to fucking do with it, essentially. But what I did here is I actually created my own height map, because I had wanted to add depth to this Anor Londo floor surface for quite a while, because I had these nice big like crevices between, you know, the different tiles. And of course it was just using a normal map, and when you would, you know, pan the camera, it was like totally flat, and it still is. But now when you look at it, because I used a height map, which I created in essentially Microsoft Paint. It was paint.net, but pretty close. Obviously more features than Microsoft Paint. But basically, yeah, I just used a very simple height map, which is two colors, black and white, and then you can turn the white to be gray to sort of change the depth. But you can now see in the crevices there's actual, like, it's actually three-dimensional, very slightly. And so you can notice there's this little, just a little bit of depth being added, and I think it just looks a lot better. But I'm pretty proud of it, because it was finally me going, you know what? I'm going to make my own goddamn height map, not use a program, and I'm actually just going to... It's crazy how, like, simplistic looking they are, because it's really just telling the engine based upon the colors. I'm going to see if I have paint.net even open still. I probably don't. Yeah, we'll go to my Twitter feed now, because that is going to have more info and pictures, because that's where I document everything. If anyone is curious... that's where I do most of my documentation for like what I'm doing and progress. And also, yeah, Bloodborne is now it boots and it does the logos and it gets to the menus and even character creation. It looks like a Virtual Boy game, but that's fine. Also, Dark Souls Remastered reached the number 10 spot all time for Dark Souls Remastered, which is fucking insane. So let me go a little bit bigger here. So here is the thing I was talking about with the darkness. This was the texture they were applying to these crevices. And look how dark it is versus everything else. Like, it was just, because it was the ambient occlusion, plus it was the texture darkening things. So on the right here, I removed that. And now you just have the ambient occlusion more naturally, adding little darkness to the crevices there. I'm going to say crevices like 5,000 times. So here is the example of, the floor we just looked at, and then this is the height map. So it's so simplistic looking, but that's how DSR likes their height maps to look. And it took me a while to understand how that works. But basically, I brought the texture into paint.net, the albedo texture, and then I overlaid, I painted the lines myself, just using like a line tool, or actually it was a square or a rectangle tool, and so you can just kind of make lines. And I overlaid it onto the actual texture itself, and then I painted or filled the interiors being black, because the white portion is what actually does the depth. It's the difference between the black and the white. And so then I, of course, colored it gray because I didn't want the depth to be too much. So you can sort of alter the actual line color here to change it. And then here I was saying I replaced every pillar, which was great. Dark suckers. Yeah, so here's a better example of side by side with the better pillar. And then here's the original hexagonal pillar. And so yeah, just higher, polygon count. I also upscaled this little lever in Anor Londo. I had forgotten about this one apparently. So that's another side-by-side comparison. You can just see how many more triangles. This was back when I was using, you can actually convert triangles to quads, because quads in Blender and just in rendering in general are easier for subdivision and I think UV mapping and whatnot. So this is before I put them back to tris or triangles, because the engine will do that anyway when they go to actually render it. And then this was in the last patch, or the last version, 1.10. You'll actually get a higher poly count Duke's Archives, like distant thing from this balcony. You'll actually have a higher quality one now. You'll see it's subtle, but the sharp edges are now just a little bit less sharp. And then the texture was upscaled again. Yeah, and then here I fixed issues in the room that has a Titanite demon. This is what it originally looked like, and then this was the right side, and then I ended up fixing that. Here was a UV mapping issue in the tunnel that was leading to where the Titanite demon is. You'll see it just has a texture, and then the bricks just randomly, there's a big seam there, so I fixed that. I found a floating lever in the Elden Ring DLC, which was, I was like, yes. And then you'll notice a very classic thing I've been fixing a lot. This is in just a room in the Elden Ring DLC, so no spoilers or anything. It's just a room. You'll see the actual scaling on this tile texture. It's not matching. So that would be an easy fix to fix that and make it look like on the left here. They just have the scaling a little wrong. I removed this mesh flap. You'll see these actual, like, the caps or little, whatever you would call these on the banisters. You'll notice this very specific banister in Duke's Archives. They had the little tops here misaligned. So they were actually moved to the left too much. But all the other banisters were fine, so I fixed that. I fixed this mesh hole that you could see in Duke's Archives, and that's after it was fixed. There's just, there's so many things in Duke's Archives. Yeah, this was another instance where this was the left side of the room, this was the right side of the room. You'll notice on the left side, it correctly had this actual, like, design or trim or whatever. And on the right side, I noticed that they had the bottom portion and the top portion, but they were just missing the actual trim portion. So I fixed that. And then this was another issue where you'll notice it just was missing a mesh face. So it had the top part, but then it didn't have the bottom part. And this was on the other side of the room. And so That's all I'm really doing is looking on the other side, looking on this side, going, oh, okay, so what was the intention? Okay, well, the intention was clearly to have trim here, so, and I fixed that. That was the Dua Lipa thing. That's very funny. So I also, oh yeah, I forgot. I did this in Northern Undead Asylum. I did make the pillars slightly better here. I could do a little bit more work. Or no. Yeah, no, I did do it on that, and I also fixed the UV mapping, you'll notice, around this. So there's so many issues. Like literally the pillars have looked like this, the little UV mapping since the 2011 release. And then bricks were floating. So yeah, I don't need to go through all of that, but literally that's what I've been doing for hours each day. And that's what's being included in all the new updates to Dark Souls Remastered. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. And if you didn't, well, that sucks. Need head. Okay, I'm going to take a screenshot of that. I'm going to put that on Twitter. That's a pretty good one. My man is bricked up. But yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed the little behind the scenes look of upgrades I'm making, and I want to enhance the polygonal detail in Dark Souls Remastered beyond what it was originally intended to be, because it was limited by the PS3 and 360, but no longer. I shall make very strategic upgrades, and yeah, so I'll see you on the next video. Thank you for watching.